Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and it is full review time on my OZ Machine Company Roosevelt. Kevin from Left EDC has been bugging me because he's been asking to borrow this knife ever since I got it because he really wants to check one out, and I have been taking my sweet time at getting the full review done, and I keep telling him, yeah, after I review it, I'll send it to you to check it out. So I'm finally going to do that. Kev, it'll be on the way to you. But yeah, I've taken my time to review this knife. A part of that is I've reviewed the knife in the past. I had a loaner one that belonged to my buddy Jason at the time, and I fell in love with the Roosevelt based on the one that he sent me to borrow and to check out. And I had already, it was a knife that was on my radar even before he sent me the loaner of it, and I had been planning on trying to get a book spot the next time they opened, all that kind of stuff. But when I experienced the knife the first time, it was like, whew, I need one of those so bad. And that turned into me trying to get a book spot, missing it, and then on the next book opening, which seemed like forever after it, finally got a book spot, and that's how this one now exists. This particular Roosevelt is number 209, and it came from the kind of book spot drop that had the least options up to that point in terms of what you could do, which turned out to be fine for me. I'm a pretty vanilla knife kind of guy, and I ordered this one as basic as it could be ordered. It is the golf putter milling in the only finish it was offered in at the time. Couldn't even pick an anodizing color or anything like that. I did all blackened hardware. The blade is Z-Finette with this stonewashed finish, the only option at the time. And the clip is just stonewashed. That was the only option at the time, unless you got Zircuti or whatever. And then there's a blackened backspacer. So the options I could have done were like Timascus stuff, whatever. That's not really my thing. And I got this knife to keep and to use, and this is the setup that makes me happiest to carry and keep and use. So, yeah. I've done a full review on the one that I was loaned before. That one was a different spec, though. It had coated handles, it had a crown spine, it had brightly anodized hardware and clip. That knife was gorgeous, too. That one was an awesome spec. And I did carry that one, and I think I did light cutting with it at the time, but this has been my knife now for a couple of months, and I have carried it a lot, and I've cut with it a lot, and I've put it through its paces so much more than I did with that first one. And at the end of the day, if anything, this is going to be a more positive review than the first one. The more I've carried this knife, the more I've cut with it, the more I've enjoyed it. It puts a smile on my face to carry this knife and to cut with it and to use it. And it works so well. It feels so good. I really struggle to find anything to even gripe about on this knife, or to nitpick about. It's just so close to perfection for what I want out of a little pocket knife. So I guess we'll just kind of go through it. I didn't rewatch my old video. This may sound like all basically the same stuff. It's been a long time since I shot that one, but based on this one, I'm just going to go through carry, cutting, action, ergos, all my typical stuff, and we're going to talk about it in that way. And if you're watching this just to see if it's a knife I recommend and it's not already abundantly clear, yes, I recommend this knife. If you can get a book spot for one of these, you should. I paid $500 even for this knife, and that feels incredibly good to me. On the secondary, these go for, I could probably list this knife, having used and carried it a fair bit, I could probably list it for $1,200 tonight, being totally honest about how much it's been used and carried, and someone would be happy to buy it. That's crazy on the secondary. I would never do that. I do not recommend paying $1,200 for one of these, because I wouldn't, but to some people who would, it makes sense to them. Clearly, some people would rather do that than wait and gamble as to whether they can get a book spot, which is very difficult to get. So I understand it. I'm not condoning that's where the market is, that sellers are doing that. That's a whole conversation I don't mean to get into in this video of should people charge more than table for blah, 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 blah. It's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about the knife and the way I feel about it. But if you can get a book spot, especially, you absolutely should. I will still try to get a book spot every time that they open, because I'd like to have another one. And I'm not really like a big multiples kind of guy, but it would be worth it to me to have more than one of these. That's how much value I think is in it for what they cost if you get them new. So yeah, let's go through real quick what the knife is made of, and then we'll do ergos, action, carry, cutting, all that stuff. The blade steel on this guy, Z-Finit, I already mentioned that. He has these, I think mostly made not in-house now. He does all the like finishing touches on them and stuff, but I think he has these ground even by a third party, which has helped him to make these much faster. Interesting move, but it seems to be working. So yeah, it's Z-Finit, which if you're not super familiar with it, you may be familiar with LC200N. Same thing, chemically the same as LC200N. So it's a virtually rust-proof blade steel, which is really cool. The edge that came on it is fantastic. All I've done is strop it a few times, and I've been able to keep this edge going quite well. I believe Daniel sharpens on a wicked edge, which reminds me, I still need to have him on the podcast. I talked to him about that when I got this, and yeah, time has gotten away from me. But Daniel, you're coming on the podcast. I say that here so that he feels like he has to, because he's been wishy-washy about wanting to. Anyway, so Z-Finit blade, handle scales, titanium, hardware, all titanium, backspacer, titanium, clip, titanium, lock bar insert, I believe, I don't know what steel it is, but it's got a hardened steel insert. It might just be LC200N as well, or Z-Finit or whatever. This one in particular has 2 detent balls and has a hardened insert. So you've got literally 2 detents, which we're going to talk about in action because it's good. And then you have a hardened insert with an interface that sticks up. Proud of those. I don't know if I'd possibly be able to show you, but you may be able to see between there. You can see 2 detent ball holes, and then you can see a little bit of a hardened interface sticking up just kind of on this side of them toward the spine of the blade when it's closed. So yeah, interesting internally the way it's worked out, but it's masterful. It really, really works well. So yeah, that's it in construction. It's also heavily internally milled out, brings the weight down to this being a very light knife for its being a full metal construction, not being carbon fiber or anything. I've heard the carbon ones of these are stupid light. He's done some with like end cut carbon fiber and stuff, and those get really, really light. But yeah, nice, slim, lightweight knife. Z-Finit blade, titanium, everything else. The hardened insert, which is also an over travel stop I'll mention too. Okay, so let's start with ergos. Freaking incredible. For my hand, I wear medium-sized gloves, fill them out real well, but it is perfection in this finger choil. The forward choil is a game changer on this knife. If I'm not using the forward choil, my pinky kind of half hangs off. Doesn't feel that amazing. It's not bad, but it doesn't feel great. In the forward choil, it feels molded to my hand. It's just a really, really great forward finger choil. The sizing is generous, so even people with bigger hands than mine tend to find this forward choil really, really nice. And yeah, it is a great handle in that way. So hammer grip, excellent. Saber grip, excellent. My thumb almost always lands past the jimping. There is some jimping here. It's not overly aggressive. If I were to, here's one small nitpick. If I were to have the options, and I talked about this I think in my original review, if I were to be able to have unlimited options, like full custom, build whatever you want, Daniel will do it kind of thing, I would ask to have no jimping at all on the knife. The jimping doesn't bother me per se that it's on here, but I would prefer it without it. And I just don't like jimping personally. Some people love jimping, so you'd want it here. But if I could do one with absolutely no jimping and a crown spine, man, that would be money for me. I would absolutely love that. But it's quite good, even with the jimping. And again, the jimping doesn't really bother me. Yeah, so hammer grip, saber grip, both great. Draw cut, if I'm down here, totally doable. If I land kind of trying to use the choil, then it gets a little uncomfortable because of that point. But I don't know, I'm not really draw cutting with this knife often, or ever yet, I don't think. Reverse grip, I find myself wanting to come up here and not use the choil because it feels a little more natural with the spacing of this forward groove and kind of the groove behind it, because when it's my pinky landing in there, it feels way too big, but that's doable. Up here feels better. And then reverse grip, draw cut, same thing. I want to choke back on the handle so that I'm not in that groove. So that groove really only honestly works great in hammer grip and saber grip. Like, that's kind of these ergos are phenomenal, and I think some of the other grips suffer because of that, which is a fair trade-off because everyone reasonably is going to be using the knife in a hammer or a saber grip way more than any other grip. So yeah, it's excellent in those ways. The action, let's talk about. You've got a nice sized finger hole here, and I middle finger flick it every time that I open it. You can thumb flick it. I've gotten it quite a few times. I feel like I have to get a little used to it. Oh man, it's awkward for the camera too. You can kind of flick outward, I think. I don't know. I see some people do it all the time. Yeah, I guess if I just flick forward, if I stop overthinking it, it works sometimes. I couldn't care less, however, about how it thumb flicks, because the middle finger flick on this knife, I think I can say definitively, I think I'm comfortable making the definitive statement that compared to any other knife I've ever experienced, including some very nice, very high-end knives, like even my Arius, this knife, middle finger flicks the best. It is just so fantastic to middle finger flick. Whether I'm at the bottom of this hole, the middle of this hole, the top of this hole, the way that these detents are set up, it's masterful. Absolutely incredible for the middle finger flick. And middle finger flicking is my favorite way to open a knife. So to have it so catered to be the best at that really scratches an itch for me. This is my favorite knife to middle finger flick. And the sounds it makes, it's this tingy, snicky, like, oh, it sounds so good. It's kind of like, I remember hearing one time somebody on Motor Trend, I want to say it was, I don't remember who it was, but on one of their like head-to-head videos back in the day, they were talking about Porsche gearboxes, and they described the way that the Porsche dual clutch gearbox, when you're using paddle shifters, feels like a really masterful Vegas dealer who's just like the way that they can just feed a card to you, and the way it feels almost inhuman when you see that level of card dealing where it's like snick, 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 you know, like just so precise. And that's how they described that gearbox, that transmission feeling. And I feel like that analogy stuck with me, because when I feel a really good knife action that feels and sounds that masterful, it reminds me of something like that. Like a really slick dealer who was just like, oh, it gets me. And the Roosevelt is the best, in my opinion, the best middle finger flicking knife that I have yet to experience across many, many knives, most of which I tried to middle finger flick. So yeah, it's just epic. It's not going to be the most drop shutty guillotine knife in the world. With a little coaxing, it comes down easily. If you give it it feels smooth, kind of controlled, but it sounds so good the whole way through, and the way that it deploys is just perfect. It is so good. And I get such a kick out of this knife. Maybe I'll sidebar that for the end. Hopefully I'll remember to remind myself. Remember, Jake. All right. So we've talked ergos in action. Let's talk carry. It has a nice pocket clip on it for a milled titanium clip. I actually really, really quite like it. Super simple. It's not overly complex or like artistic or whatever. It's not the most deep carry in the world, but it carries fairly deep, and it's just very usable. The knife itself is really, really slim, and that for me is the biggest contributing factor to how comfortable the knife is in pocket. And this being super slim, it's remarkably comfortable in pocket. I've already mentioned that it's quite lightweight, so being lightweight, being slim, having a good usable pocket clip, no flipper tabs sticking out anywhere, everything is smooth, there's no hot spots, there's no annoying corners. This knife is a dream to carry. I've carried it a lot as a primary and even more as a secondary. This knife is awesome to have in my back pocket, and it's also plenty of knife to have in my front pocket. It carries very comfortable in any pocket I've put it in, and I love it for that. So carry is just excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. The only way I could foresee myself liking it even better would be if it had a deep carry clip that came all the way to the butt end of the knife, and then I might like it a hair more. But I like it so much that this doesn't bother me one bit. Then that leaves us with cutting. So let's talk cutting. Even having these blades kind of ground externally, like I mentioned, he has a vendor who does it for him, and what they do is blade grinding, from what I understand. They do it for quite a few companies. I think they even do hinderers. The way that they've done it, it's really, really good. It's a nice, super tall flat grind, not an overly thick blade stock to begin with, so it's a very slicey profile. This knife slices like an absolute dream. I want to say they have it at like 13 thousandths behind the edge, somewhere right around there, and with a nice tall flat and a thin behind the edge profile, it's just an awesome slicer. It's also, blade shape wise, I find super usable. You've got a good, just like consistent belly all the way through. You've got a great tip, which is like pretty pokey stabby actually with the swedge, but it's not so thin that I'd be worried about using this knife pretty hard. And I use this knife pretty hard, not like crazy stuff, but a lot of packaging, a lot of zip ties, a lot of cardboard, and it glides through everything that I want it to glide through. So I really, really like using this blade. It's an excellent cutter. So I think that's my categories, right? We talked carry, we talked cutting, we talked action, we talked ergos. Great. Now, the thing I meant to remember. There's this interesting thing that happens with this knife. I carry this knife a lot, and it's a knife that I like to show people. Here's where it gets interesting. When I show this knife to non-knife people, to people who aren't into the hobby of knives, even people who like get knives and carry knives and like them, but aren't like in the hobby. They aren't constantly looking out for what's new, and they aren't trying new stuff all the time, and they aren't like, it's not important to them in their lives like it is to me, and probably to some of you who are watching a video about this obscure knife made by a small maker in Indiana. When I show it to people who aren't super into knives, usually before I say anything, they think it's fairly nice, but they usually want to like use their thumb, and it's not the greatest thumb opening knife. Most people who aren't super knife people, I find, aren't middle finger flicking things, so that's kind of lost on them. And then it's a pretty simple looking knife when you just look at it on its own. It's not complex. It doesn't look overly designed. It doesn't look futuristic. This one in particular doesn't have any fancy materials on it. It's gray and monochrome, and like, when they look at it, they're like, oh yeah, that seems nice. And when I tell people who have that reaction that on the secondary, I could sell this for over $1,000 easily, they lose their minds a lot of the time. I've seen a number of people just be incapable of understanding how this could be worth so much, to like that other people would be excited to pay that for it, let alone the fact that I paid $500 for it, because to so many people that's an exorbitant amount of money for a knife, right? So it's really interesting that I get that reaction when I show it to non-knife people. But I've found when I show this knife to knife people, to people who get it, to people who care about the things that I care about in knives and spend their time thinking about knives and taking pictures of knives and talking to other people about knives, they love handling the Roosevelt. Even just last week at USN, I handed it to friends I was at the table with at the Cove. One of the nights I brought down my knife case, and this was in there. And like Nick from Niche Designs, and Ben from Jack Wolf Knives, and Lindy and Richie from Knife Modders were there, and a few people at the table. And everybody who gets knives and picks this up and middle finger flicks it adores the way it middle finger flicks. I've never seen someone not be excited about that. But then you also see people notice, when they know what they're looking for, they notice so many little things about this knife that are just not even complex, but masterfully done. Like, just excellently executed. The internal milling is phenomenal and extensive. The way that there's 2 detent balls and a hardened interface with over travel stop. And it's all packaged in this tiny little spot, and it all works so well to have a bank vault, no play, front to back, side to side, amazing lockup, and to create such a good action. And like, there's all these, just, it's so many little things, and just the way things are finished, the way everything fits, the way that the design fits your hand, the way it all comes together is one of those things that I think can only be appreciated by people who understand, to the initiated, if you will. And I find that it's consistently been these two polar reactions. That when you hand the knife to somebody who is initiated, who gets it, there's this intense excitement about it. And to people who don't get it, it seems so crazy that there are people out there like the initiated who do get it, right? And it's fun for me because, I don't know, people find knives exciting in a lot of different ways. And so I think it's fun to have this one that's like, it's exciting for the enthusiast. And that's what I'm into. I'm an enthusiast of knives. And I'm in pursuit of knives like this that scratch those itches that you have to be deep in to even have itching you. I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, it's a really a fun thing to show this knife to people. So, I don't know. It's one of my absolute favorite knives. It's certainly top 3 for me. It might even be my favorite knife in my collection. It's hard because the Arius has been a favorite of mine for so long, and a lot of people ask me, like, can it dethrone the Arius? I get asked a lot of times when I get a new knife that's exciting if it can dethrone the Arius. And I've had this now for months, and I don't know. I'd have to really sit down and think about if I could only have one of them, removing the idea of which is worth more, or which I could get more money for, like how easy it would be to get another one, like which one objectively do I just like more. It's really difficult between this and the Arius. They both feel really, really special. I think this is the more usable knife for me. I think this would be the more comfortable to carry and use everyday knife, even above the Arius for me. But I don't know. It's top 1 or 2 of my collection for sure. So there you have it. I guess that'll be my full review of the OZ Machine Company Roosevelt. Hopefully I'll have a podcast soon with Daniel on. He's a really cool guy from the conversations that I've had with him so far. And I love this knife so much. Again, if you get a chance to get a book spot, you absolutely should. I probably shouldn't say that because it's just going to make it harder and harder and harder to get book spots the more people that are trying. Secondary is unfortunate right now. So the only way to get that price to come down is if people stop paying that much. But it is what it is. That's how much they are right now because people are willing to pay it. And I honestly get why some people are willing to pay that much. There are other knives out there that cost more than these go for on secondary that I'd have a harder time paying that for. So maybe they're priced too cheap from Daniel. I shouldn't say that either because if I get another one, I want it to be this cheap again. But man, it's so good. I guess I just have a lot of thoughts here. Anyway, thanks guys. I appreciate it, and I'll link to OZ Machine Company down below, not because this is endorsed or sponsored by him or anything, but just because I love his knives. I think he's great, and I think he deserves even more recognition than he currently gets, which seems to be kind of a lot, because I don't know anyone who doesn't like the Roosevelt. But thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next one.